I was finding in that initial kind of trial of utilizing it, that if I took that week as kind of a deload, then they'd have something else come up. And now I'm having, of the 4 weeks in a month, I'm utilizing 2 of those as a deload. One of them is not even really needed, but I feel as though because of the research that it is needed. And so then they're getting kind of like just a half month of this lackluster effort to their training that isn't overly necessary potentially because of circumstances within their life, within their cycle, and those things. So I think that it overcomplicated things, especially for the athlete, because they're like, I don't really feel like I need this right now. And I'm like, no, 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 because of your cycle. This is the research. This is why you need to pay attention. And it just wasn't true.
Today's episode is with Alex Bush. Alex is a coach, trainer, and co-founder of the online coaching platform, Physique Development. He has a bachelor's degree in exercise science, as well as several continuing education certifications. Alex has been coaching for 8 years and has worked with over 1,000 competitive physique athletes, as well as lifestyle clients. So this episode is the first of a 2-part series where Alex and I will be chatting all about the top keys to building muscle as a female. So today we'll be diving into the first 3 important factors that revolve around calorie intake, sleep and recovery, and hormonal health. Again, Alex has over 8 years of experience working with hundreds of female clients, so he definitely knows what he's talking about when it comes to muscle growth as well as health and performance optimization for females in general. So let's get into part 1 of this series with Alex Bush. All right, welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and I'm here with Alex Bush. What's up, Alex? How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited you're here. I've been looking forward to this for a while now. So if any of the listeners don't know, Alex is my coach. I talk a lot on the podcast, especially with solo episodes, diving into kind of the importance of having a coach and why it's beneficial and why I typically always have my own coach when it comes to fitness and nutrition. So Alex is my coach right now, and I am really excited to we have a lot of cool things we're going to talk about today. And before we do that, do you want to just give the listeners a little bit of background on who you are, how you got into fitness, nutrition, and how it brought you to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah, I think that within my overall background, so to give you guys like the brief one, is that I have my bachelor's degree in exercise science. I've been online coaching. I started in the in-person space before that. So I've been online coaching for 8 years. And then I started in person, just one-on-one personal training, and then moved into the college realm where I was working with Division II athletes and the volleyball and softball team specifically for a short period of time prior to getting Physique Development to where it is at this point. But we started, Physique Development is the company that I own, and that is where we online coach from, I suppose. And within that, we started Physique Development while I was in college. It was actually my freshman year or my sophomore year, one of the two. And within that, really, we just were selling training programs. We were Facebook messaging people basically every day. It was something that was a massive passion project. We were kind of on YouTube playing around and posting funny videos, which was easy as college kids who didn't have money. We were just kind of expressing like, okay, this is how we kind of balance having jobs and then also going to school and getting our training in while tracking macros. So in that was kind of how we got our start. And then we were selling like 10, sometimes I would upsell to $20 programs, which was fantastic at the time, which supplemented my, my rent payment every month more so. And so that was kind of how the, Physique Development got started, and then we've blossomed into a staff of 12 coaches now, which is, I'm skipping a ton here within the 8 years, but we're at 12 total coaches, and we work with a wide array of clients, which has been a massive blessing, and was the kind of the initial intent once we got things going, is that I wanted to have a staff of coaches that we were able to facilitate a service for a wide array of individuals, starting from the very beginning to very advanced. And we have coaches who are going to kind of fall into those tiers, which is now kind of coming to fruition as a whole. And then prior to the creation of Physique Development, my love for fitness and nutrition and bodybuilding as a whole was fostered very early on. I really enjoyed muscular development. I was a huge Jay Cutler fan in like 5th or 6th grade. I was a very small human being. I think that my freshman year of high school, I was like 100 and less than 115 pounds. So I was really skinny. And within that, it was not by purpose. I just had played a ton of sports growing up, and I was just a smaller kid in general. And so I remember very vividly my freshman year of high school, we'd have 2-a-days for football, and we had to put our weight pre and post training, our pre and post practice. And if we lost too much weight, we couldn't practice. We couldn't practice later on in the evening because of the weight loss. And so I would lie on that because I didn't want my teammates to know how little I actually was. Like they couldn't visually see me. So I would add,
Funny.
15 to 20 pounds to my frame. So I was a little bit closer to my friends, at least, of where they weighed. But I mean, obviously they could see me that I was skin and bone at the time. So that was kind of the initial portion of things, was that I was just wanting to be better within athletics. And I was very mesmerized by bodybuilding in general, but by the mass monsters. And at the time, I truthfully thought that was, I was capable of that from a very young age. So I was all in. I started tracking macros, I think when I was like 14, maybe. With little notepads that I would get from Dollar General. And my mom has actually located those as of late. They're finally cleaning out my room. I haven't lived there on closer to a decade at this point. And they're finally like, all right, we're gonna get rid of some of your junk. And I'm like, great. I'm glad that you guys are taking the steps here. And she located all those notebooks that I had that were, I'm sure, very wrong in terms of how I was tracking it. I had little idea of what I was doing. But I would track it as like, I'm sure my chicken allotment of like how much I was eating was totally wrong, all those things. But that's how I got started, was like before my Fitness Pal and all that, I was just kind of winging it through these notepads that I carried around with me everywhere like a dork. And just to make sure I had enough food in place. And that's kind of how I got started personally within everything. And a lot of my early training, there was components of bodybuilding that were involved. I enjoyed, like I said, watching, but I was kind of like a closet fan because I was so small that it probably would have sounded ridiculous if I would have brought it to my friends of like, guys, I love Jay Cutler. I love all these different bodybuilders. And it's like, dude, I don't really know how you expect yourself to like get to this point where you're at right now. So I was kind of like a closet fan of bodybuilding for a long time, and really just focused on sports emphasis throughout high school into college, as I played college baseball for a short period of time. And so, yeah, I guess that would be the background of me.
And you did end up competing, right? In bodybuilding?
I did end up competing, yes. So I competed through men's physique for 4 or 5 years. I toy with the idea of going back every once in a while. I enjoy the aspect of coaching painfully more than being on stage myself. It is so much more fulfilling for me to be on the side of coaching relative to being up there on stage. On stage is not really the point that are the part of the process that I really enjoyed all that much. Come to find out after the fact of competing, is that the training is my true love in general. The passion that I carry for the resistance training portion of things is the root of it all. And so now having the ability to have athletes who get up on stage and to be able to walk through that process with them, walk alongside them, is significantly more fulfilling, like I said, than it was for me when I was competing myself.
Yeah, that's awesome though. And so just to give the listeners a little background, so you work, do you work primarily with female clients or both? Is it a mix?
Yeah, I work with a small number of male clients. I find a lot more enjoyment working with females. I think that there's a couple of different components. I like, from the sports side of things, I like the aspect of the female divisions more in terms of bikini, wellness, and figure being the 3 that I would put my expertise into. But I do have a small number of male clients. And then from a lifestyle perspective, I think that the communication aspect is massive within online coaching, as you know. And I find it very difficult communication wise for to connect to that level with males to really make the progress that's
Mhm.
necessary. Um, and so I've found that just the process and enjoyment of the coaching has been more fulfilling and enjoyable for me working with females, and that's just kind of how things organically started for me specifically, however or whatever reason that would be. But I found that I enjoy it the most, and that's probably how it happened organically, is that I was having a lot of
Mhm.
fun working with the athletes and seeing the progress. um, but yeah, I work with easily 90% female, and the staff as a whole, I would say we're probably 70 to 75% female across all the coaches.
Mhm. Gotcha, gotcha. That's awesome. And that's, one of the main reasons why I wanted to have you on today to talk about what we're going to talk about, which I guess I should introduce that. So, we're going to be covering or Alex is going to be covering for us kind of his key key things to focus on for females when it comes to building muscle or growing muscle. And obviously Alex has been doing this for many, many years. He's worked with tons of females. Within physique competitors alongside like lifestyle clients, right, those who are not competing. And so I think maybe today I definitely want to focus more so on kind of like the lifestyle, and I know they go hand in hand,
Of
like
course.
competitors versus lifestyle, but maybe we can focus a little bit more on like the lifestyle client. And when we say lifestyle, just someone who is not necessarily in the realm of competition, bodybuilding competitions, at this point in time.
Mhm.
So yeah, so maybe we can kind of just get started. So we're going to go over some of the keys to building muscle as a female. I know this is a subject that I am super passionate and interested in. I work with a lot of female clients as well, and it's one of the things that I think can be just misunderstood, or just there's a lot of misconceptions, and there's a lot of kind of things that I would say females tend to stray away from when it comes to building muscle, when those are probably the things that actually need to be focused on the most.
Right.
So do you want to just start off with kind of, we can kind of go through them and you can go in as depth as you want. We can kind of have side conversations. We might need to make this a 2-part series if we end up going down
Maybe.
some rabbit holes, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's start off with the first one. I have the list here, so I'll kind of just prompt you with them. But the first one that you had on the list, and I guess the thing to actually start off with here, we talked about a list off air, but would you say that these are sort of in order of like importance, or they kind of all flow together?
I would say they flow together. I wouldn't say that you could argue that some have greater priority as a whole, but I wouldn't
Hmm.
want the listeners to feel as though it's like, well, I did the top three, and so like the other, five or six are not going to be necessary. So I would say that although they're going to be a lot, and this is going to be a lot of information, I think that all of them need to coexist, or I wouldn't have put them as kind of the principles
Hmm.
to follow. So take that for what it's worth as a listener.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so no, that makes sense, and I wanted to prompt that too because it's something to realize. Like all of these things matter, and some may be a little bit more important than
Right.
others, but it also depends on the individual too, like where they're at, right? So,
Mhm.
okay, so the first one is going to be probably the scariest one that I first had
Yeah.
to kind of come to terms with, but calorie surplus and why that matters for optimizing muscle growth, especially as a female.
Right. So, within just nutritional intake in general, we're going to see from a research perspective that we can see muscle gain in a slight deficit, muscle gain in a slight caloric surplus or at maintenance, but our greatest propensity to put on muscle tissue is going to be in a caloric surplus. And this is very scary for most women, because majority of their time has been, I want to be smaller, I want to be smaller, I want to be smaller, or I want to, or just being in a caloric deficit in general. And so now we're shifting gears to the polar opposite. Now we're seeing the scale climb in a way that generally people do not want to see. And it's a little scary, especially if you're doing it by yourself, by increasing calories, because you don't necessarily know, is like, am I putting on muscle, am I putting on body fat? I can't really tell, especially if it's not a trained eye, if it's just somebody who is from a lifestyle perspective doing this for the first time and trying to take it on themselves. So in this, I with calorie surpluses specifically, I think that many reach out to coaches when they are wanting to lose body fat. They have their wedding coming up, they have X, Y, and Z event to get ready for. Whereas I think the greater benefit, that they're both beneficial times to work with a coach, but this is a great time for that deficit that you do want to be ready for, that vacation that you do want to be ready for, to have the muscle that you're wanting to have or the shape that you're wanting to carry within your physique. Having this in alignment and spending some time in a caloric surplus, which is going to influence a lot of the things that we talk about later on in a positive manner. And so within the caloric surplus, oftentimes what happens here is that there's a lot of fluctuation of intake if they're consuming or, structuring it themselves. So they'll find themselves in a situation where they track for 3 days and it's a little bit too much food. So then they have one day where it's like, oh, my appetite wasn't there. So then they very low consumption of calories, and then they find themselves kind of in this seesaw effect of like, some days I'm eating my food, some days I'm not. And so I find that getting into just a slight surplus is going to be the absolute best way, because it does allow for greater freedom within the nutritional allocations, to where you can go out and have a dinner with your boyfriend or with significant other or friends and not have to track everything so meticulously. Whereas if you go to kind of that top threshold of what the surplus can be without you accumulating a greater density of body fat, you have to be pretty stringent within that intake, because you don't have a ton of room for error, if you will. Whereas if we start
Mhm.
at a very small surplus, it gives us the ability to, one, put on a good bit of muscle without accumulating excess body fat, but also gives us the opportunity to have greater flexibility of going out for drinks and those different types of things that are going to be necessary for you to be a human and get to enjoy things from a day-to-day perspective, which is only going to help your overall adherence, because of your ability to have that flexibility and still to live your normal life that you're not taking away from your day-to-day activities because of the dietary allocations or what have you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And would you say that, you know, in terms of where the person's starting off at, would that influence that, calorie surplus? So, for example, if someone was like completely new to training or they're just getting into training, we kind of know that like the newer you are, the easier it is to put on muscle, right?
Right.
Would you say that, you tend to keep people more so around maintenance if they're completely new, and then as they advance, maybe they do need to be in that surplus or
Yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up, is that when they are newer or within probably the first 3 years of their resistance training, I would keep them closer to that maintenance set point, because they're going to have that beautiful effect of, I'm losing body fat, but I'm also able to put on some muscle tissue, as long as recovery is in a good place and their activity levels are not over and above what they are consuming from a caloric perspective. Then at that point, that's kind of what I'm paying the closest attention to within
Mhm.
my personal practice and I encourage the listeners to also do so, is that yes, the scale is going to be helpful for you, but you have so many other things that you want to pay attention to that we'll kind of dig into a little bit here, that
Mhm.
are going to be more beneficial for you in terms of tracking your progress. Because if we're only using the scale as a single metric, it can become very disheartening. It can become a very negative like association with the scale, because it's not going the way that you anticipated it to. You're not seeing the shifts in your physique that you want. But in reality, if we were to look at all the biofeedback and the training and in your sleep and all these different things, then at that point you would see, oh, I am making a lot of progress. It's just not within this singular metric that we are so heavily focusing on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just to kind of put a few numbers behind things, and I know this is super individual, but in general, like what would you say a slight surplus would be considered over someone's maintenance? Like, for example, is it, 100 calories a day, 200? Like, how do you kind of
Yeah.
quantify that?
Which this is a tough one for the
Yeah.
listeners specifically, is that when you are assessing maintenance, this is going to work on kind of a continuum. So let's say that you have assessed your maintenance and it's at 2,000 calories, just to make it simple on us. And what transpires is that now well, your job's changed. Now you're working from home. Now that caloric maintenance may be moving down to 1800 calories or 1750 because of the lack of just overall NEAT that you're achieving from a day-to-day perspective. So it does work on a continuum. So if you are, seeing shift of like, well, that's weird. I'm consuming foods that I felt was my maintenance, and now I'm kind of adding a little bit of body fat, or my body composition is changing. Look and really assess where your activity has potentially changed from when that set point had transpired. So within that, I would say 100 to 125 calories above that set point would be a good place to start. See how you feel, and then it's going to be something that you're slightly adjusting as time goes on. When I am advising a client that has departed from their time working with me, I try to really set them up with a game plan when they leave, so that they do have the foundation to continue to press forward and what I would suggest. And so I generally will advise for them to analyze things from a 10 to 14-day period and really be honest with themselves of where their adherence was. If you were going out with your friends and you had, 3 or 4 days where it was kind of crazy and you weren't tracking all that well, and then you had you had the rest of the time where you tracked well, and then the scale is up within those readings, like, oh, I need to bring down my food. Not necessarily, right? You had
Mm-hmm.
those 3 or 4 days that were kind of a free for all, and so now you've got to reassess and say, I'm just going to stay here. I'm going to get another 10 to 14 days of 80 to 100% of adherence, and see where I stand. And if the scale is continuing to go up at that point, then I think that you have the right call, and you should bring down your food just a little bit to see how you fare. But that's how I would assess things. I would utilize the scale as much as it can be just a data point for you. If you find yourself getting into a place where it's really affecting your mental health, from I weigh this one day, I weigh this the next day, and I'm kind of teeter-tottering between happiness and sadness because of what that's telling me, I would remove the scale at that point and utilize the biofeedback markers that are important to you in terms of your sleep, your training performance, your visual images, those different things being of high priority comparative to the scale readings.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. And that's something that's a great point you made about maintenance being a range and not just like a static number. I think that's something a lot of people, it's like a newer concept that people don't realize. Yeah. And it goes in both ways too, like within a deficit as well, which we're not going to talk about today, but
Right.
it's an important thing to understand. Awesome. Okay. So we got through number one and it's been like 20
Good.
minutes. Cool. Cool. Okay. So let's go on to the next one. This one is
Yes.
something that I ignored for a long time. And I talk about this a lot when I do like solo episodes, how I just like was, it's a lot better now, but sleep and recovery, more so recovery in the sense of just the overall like understanding of why recovery is so important for muscle growth. And I talk about this a lot. And I know you do too, like, muscle is not grown and it's not built when you're working out, right? It's broken down, right? You're literally breaking down your muscle tissues when you're working out, when you're lifting. And obviously you need that to have subsequent growth, but the growth is actually happening when you're recovering, when you're sleeping, when your muscles are repairing. That's when they quote unquote build or grow. Would you agree with that?
I would agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So recovery is so important when it comes to just muscle growth in general, if that is your main goal. So let's dive into, why sleep and recovery are so important and what you found, working with your clients and all of that.
Yeah, I think that the importance is exactly what you spoke to in terms of the muscle tissue truly being built and reconstructed, if you will, from the time away from the gym. I will speak to a situation for myself where I spoke about being in college and doing the YouTube videos. It was a time where we were painfully overcaffeinated, painfully overworked, and to think now, looking back, to think back and think that, oh my gosh, I thought I was able to add muscle tissue at that point in my life is very unlikely, just with all the things going on and the lack of prioritization of the recovery component as well. So within the recovery, things that I really drive home within our athletes is that oftentimes when women come to our service, they're generally doing too much. Very infrequently are they doing too little? They may be applying too much or too little intensity to the training, but in terms of just overall activity, the general consensus is going to be too much. And it in terms of what I'm speaking to with too much is that they're resistance training maybe 5 or 6 days a week, but then they're also going to Orange Theory maybe 4 times a week. And then they're going on runs, and then they're in this caloric deficit. And so we have to understand that the caloric expenditure there is leaps and bounds past what's being put in place to even fuel those sessions. And that's why we see the poor body composition, poor recovery, hormonal function, all those things. And so within the sleep and recovery, getting clients to a place where they're able to sleep 8 hours a night, where they're only resistance training maybe 4 days a week, and then they've changed those runs to just outdoor walks and spending more time in a parasympathetic state, which I'm sure that you've talked about this within your podcast at some point or another or multiple times, but just spending more time in a rest and digest state rather than this fight or flight that many of us find ourselves in from the time that we wake up to the time that we're trying to go to bed, because some individuals listening probably are getting up and hitting their training sessions, then getting their kids ready for school and getting them all going. And then they're at work all day, they come back, and then they're running around with kids from until they go to bed, and then they've got like 30 minutes. So it's a situation where we've got to really be on the front end of prioritizing sleep. Utilizing like restorative or yin yoga is something that I'm a big proponent of, and just having a better balance of nutrients being put into place and allowing for you to see the recovery that's necessary for you to see the muscle growth that you want in this scenario, but just in your general health, this is going to be a big driver for you long term.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, all of those points are super important. Do you feel like, because the same thing with me, a lot, like you mentioned, a lot of the females that come to me, for coaching, it's like they're typically doing too much. And I was
Mhm.
right there myself. And a lot of like the cardio aspect of things as well. What would you say is like, in terms of like training 4 days a week? And when we talk about training, we're talking about like the lifting aspect of it. Do you think that that's like for most people 4 days a week, maybe 3 to 5? Like, what is your general kind of recommendation for how many days a week to lift, versus having like a rest day?
So within really 3 to 5 days, it's going to be so dependent on the individual's ability to train hard, as well as the time constraints that they have for themselves within their work environment, and also just what they have going on in their personal life. So there's going to be a component of enjoyment. There's going to be a component of necessity. There's going to be a component of um, I don't know, time, I suppose, which I guess kind of
Yeah.
goes within necessity. But I would say that I enjoy 4 sessions. I never thought that I would say that for me personally, that I thought I was always going to be kind of like a 5 session a week type person. But in reality, I don't find that now, with everything else that I have going on within my personal life and the business and those factors, that 5 days is really possible. I find that 4 days is kind of like the best that I can do to get the most bang for my session, more so because I think that many people have found themselves of like, well, 5 sessions, I still have 2 rest days. Like, I think that I can make the most progress there. But then you've got to look at the quality of each session. Are you able to be painfully present within each session, giving every exercise and every set the maximal amount of effort that you can, or what's been allotted for the intensity of that session? So analyzing those things, I think, is important, and you can still maximize growth to a degree. I think that within putting on muscle tissue, I would lean towards 4 days probably being the least that you could train. 3 days is possible. I just don't think that your maximal progress could happen in a 3 day time frame where you're probably having to train full body each session, which is going to probably elongate the session a good bit. So now you're assessing how much intensity can I withstand over a 3 session period, probably, or a full session period where you've got just the longer session in general, which
Hmm.
could be a hurdle to get over. So I would say 4 to 5 sessions is probably your best when you're trying to maximize muscle growth in general.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. I would say like, yeah, I really enjoy 4 days as well. I went to 5 days for a period of time, and it was like a nice switch up, but I was only there for a little bit of time. Like, I think it was like a year and a half ago, but
Yeah.
4 days I find is typically the most beneficial, especially for me and for a lot of the clients that I work with as well. But I do have like a lot of females coming to me and they're like, yeah, I'm in the gym 6 days a week. Like I have one active rest day, which is like a hike. And that just kind of speaks to the doing too much and feeling like more is better, when typically for most females, especially the ones that we work with who are, I call it like type A, very like want to, do more and think that's better, versus actually allowing yourself to do less and realizing like for me, for example, my body composition changed completely when I started doing half of what I was doing. Right. And then like, once you realize that that's the case, you're like, oh, okay, now this makes sense. But you kind of have to be like convinced, and you have to go through it for a little bit to realize that. So
yeah.
Awesome. I do want to just dive into one question about sleep that I had for you. So
okay.
With sleep, I know that is something that a lot of people tend to struggle with, especially if you are like a busy mom or you have like, kids, like you were kind of painting that picture before. Do you have any like recommendations, kind of general recommendations for optimizing sleep that you would kind of give to your clients, or, for any of the listeners, things that they could just really, like if it was like maybe 3 things that would really move the mark in terms of optimizing sleep?
Yeah, I think that I'm a huge advocate of overall environment. So in terms of like cleanliness of the environment, the room itself, and then also like the sheets and those different things, I think play a much larger role than people lead to believe, I suppose. So I think the environment is huge. Room temperature kind of goes alongside of that. So finding a room temperature for you that is comfortable. I find that for myself, 69 degrees is like perfect. Like that is the time, as soon as I kind of get in an environment that's roughly the temperature, I'm getting kind of sleepy. So understanding those components, and then also having some time prior to bed to be able to decompress in however you see that to be fit for you. So I know that for some clients, it's reading a book and having just some quiet time to themselves. I know that for myself, it's spending time with my wife, Sue, and getting to just decompress with her and getting to chat about the day and kind of just, with one another. So having it maybe an hour to an hour and a half before you go to bed, where you're just relaxing more so. And then the third thing is having things prepared for the next day. I know that within my clients specifically, I find that they are generally having some anxiousness about what they have to do the next day, and they don't really have a concrete plan of what's going on. And so within decision fatigue, and this is something that I speak to a lot of our clients about, is that like things that you can control are just getting your clothes laid out for the next day. I know I sound like my mom when I was like 8 years old, but like getting some of those simple decisions already hammered out for you the day before, and getting a to-do list created like before I leave my office. That's one big thing for me, is getting the to-do list done for the next day, so I have an understanding of what is expected of me when I get here in the morning. And so in that, it just gives you more peace of mind. And then I guess on par with that is having a journal. So for some, like their brain is just racing before they go to bed. And so getting some of those thoughts out on paper, like I have mine sitting here, and it's the journal itself. Some nights I barely write, or I don't write at all. And there's some nights where I'm just dumping random thoughts that don't even go with one another. I'm not completing the sentence. I'm literally just whatever's on my mind, I'm dumping onto paper. And then it's like, okay, I feel better. And I'm able to fall asleep a little bit easier. So that was like 5 things, but kind of 3.
No, you're good. No, yeah. And I love the last one, like the brain dump. I think that's something that's very underrated for like just getting you outside of your head, right? So just dumping thoughts on paper, whatever it is, and actually physically like writing it down versus like typing it out on your phone, which obviously you don't want to be on that close to bed.
Right.
That's like a whole other spiel, but most people kind of understand that now. But yeah, like the brain dump thing for me has been made a huge difference. Sometimes I get lazy with it, but when I do bring it back in, it does make a huge difference. You actually reminded me of that. I think it was like a month ago or something, but that is definitely a key, I think, for a lot of people. It's just kind of getting their thoughts on paper, getting it out of their head, and that can just take the anxiety way down. One thing that I've also been implementing the last few months actually is a weighted blanket. Have you played around with that at all?
I have.
ever?
I think the one that we have is just a little too heavy for me. Like it's cozy when I'm using it on the couch or whatever, and we're
Yeah.
watching something. But if I was to try and like fully fall asleep with it, I think that I would wake up feeling painfully claustrophobic because it's just a little too heavy.
Yeah. I've recommended to some different clients and some of them are like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then some are like, it's kind of weird.
Right.
But I've been using it. I just got one off Amazon. And it's actually been a game changer. And I traveled last weekend to my sister's house. Well, I traveled to her house like 3 weeks ago and I didn't bring it.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh man, like I need to just pile up with all these blankets. And then I went last weekend and I like had one bag that was just my weighted blanket. It was like 40 pounds.
Right.
And my dad like picked it up. He was like, what is this? And I was like, it's my weighted blanket. Whatever. Just I'll take it.
Right.
But yeah, that's something that has helped me a lot just to, it just makes you feel, I don't know,
Cozy.
confined. Yeah,
Yeah.
cozy.
I
Yeah.
would say
So
cozy and like snuggled without having to be snuggled.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Okay. So I think we're probably only going to get through one more because this one it might be a little bit longer. I told you I was
Yeah.
going to like grill you with other questions and it was just going
It's
to go.
okay.
But so we're probably going to have to do a part two if
We'll do
you're
a
down
part
for
two.
that.
That will work.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
we can certainly do that.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. And I will try not to ramble as much within each one. So let's do the last one for today. This is going to be, I'm sure there's so many different ways that we could go about talking about this one, but hormonal health in general, for specifically optimizing muscle growth for females. Maybe we could even just start off by chatting about why females versus, because there's a lot of, I guess people kind of say like, is there really a difference between the things that you should be focusing on with a male versus a female when it comes to body composition, diet, all of that? And the main thing that people point to is like females tend to have a little bit more sensitive hormones than males. And they also obviously change throughout the month, throughout the life. So maybe we can just kind of talk about starting off like why hormonal health is so important for females in general. And then obviously, especially as it relates to optimizing muscle growth.
Okay, yeah, I think that within hormonal health, this is one where it is a hot topic at the very moment, where individuals are kind of slinging around words that are sciencey and using this kind of from a sales perspective, which is a weird aspect of social media at the very moment. But it is going to be very helpful for you in terms of having adequate hormonal health, having a cycle in place that is going to recur on a monthly basis and not having the undulation of, well, I was very stressed and didn't have my cycle this week or this month. And then I'm kind of going back and forth where it's just not in an opportune position for your body to want to prioritize muscle. Adding muscle is going to be a very luxury process. The body is going to prioritize many other things before putting on muscle tissue. And so understanding that this is going to be something that is, and having your cycle is a luxury process for the body to have as well. To be able to create a human being is quite the luxury of a process as a whole. And so in that, maximizing your overall hormonal function, prioritizing that and utilizing some of the pieces within the sleep and recovery to maximize that is going to be big. And also paying attention to your labs, speaking up to your doctor, wanting to become more educated in terms of your own internal health is going to be paramount for you to make the most success possible. And we can kind of just dive through some questions more so that we have greater specificity, because this alone could be its own podcast. And I don't want to get led down a rabbit hole of like tons of information on one thing. And then it'd be like, well, then all this other stuff and we didn't get to it or what have you. So I guess we can kind of riff off some questions if you have any. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess one of the first questions I have is, I'm sure you work with females who are, maybe on birth control versus those who are not. Have you seen that play a role in building muscle in general? I know this is a very generalized question, but does that play a role in anything from your experience?
Yeah, I would say that within the birth control. So I am not of the train of thought that I am the authority of if the client should take or should not take birth control. I'm always going to say this is your decision, but these are
Mhm.
some of the key points that I've run into in terms of that specific birth control or what I've seen within other clients. So I really want to drive that home is that the birth control itself is not like the devil and you should never touch it, what have you. There are side effects just as it would be within anything, and then kind of fine tuning things to put yourself into the best position is going to be the best place to be. So yes, I have seen better muscular gains within clients who are not taking birth control as kind of a general consensus because we have better control over the variables that are transpiring within their hormonal health to get them into the best place possible, whether that be through supplementation or through activity and different vitamins and minerals into their diet, those different things. But that's not to say that I haven't had clients who have had immense success within while utilizing birth control. It's such an individual um, aspect to things of within different forms of birth control where one person can have a very good response to it, no side effects, those different things, to where just another person could have a horrible experience with it and be put into kind of a dumpster fire of hormonal health where they're having large fluctuations or they're just having very poor secretion of our main progesterone, estradiol, testosterone, DHEA. All these things are tanked because of X, Y, and Z for that singular individual. So it's something that I would always what I tell clients is that for those who are utilizing birth control, just to be on consistent blood panels can be helpful for us to get an idea of where things are at, and then we can kind of work alongside the physician if they're open to doing it. I know that there are some physicians who are very anti, any help, if you will, or
Mhm.
just general conversation, and that's a crummy situation to be in. But in that case, certainly birth control is going to play a role in your ability to put on muscle tissue, especially if you're not having a regular cycle or a regular cycle alongside that if you're able to.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think you answered that really well. It was a hard question because it's obviously gonna be so individual
Right.
with that in that regard because obviously that's only one piece that goes into everything else. I do have two more questions related to the hormone side of things. So, do you ever like have you ever found that like manipulating certain macronutrients can be beneficial within hormonal health or optimizing hormonal health? And I guess this goes specifically to potentially building muscle and being in a surplus in general is obviously going to be advantageous to hormonal health, especially for females who are coming from, being in a chronic deficit. That's probably
Right.
like the main overarching thing. But in terms of like actually manipulating different macronutrients, whether it's carbs, fats, proteins, is there any way that you go about that for certain situations, or maybe you can name a few common ones that you've seen?
So I would say that getting better quality of fats in, better quantity of total fats in has been the biggest driver in terms of within the sex hormone being carried out. A lot of them are going to be, or they're going to be lipid soluble. So they're going to be carried out with the fats, not saying that you have to have dietary fats in, they can be carried out with fats that are just being transported. But in that, what I would say is the fat content being taken in. Carbs could also play a role here, depending on how inflamed the person is going to be. So now we're kind of getting into more case by case components
Mhm.
of things, because individuals who have potentially been doing things like Orange Theory, going for distance runs and been trying to limit carbohydrates, are going to come from a place of high inflammatory response. They don't have their cellular health is not going to be great because they haven't had the carbs in place to facilitate the activity that they've been doing. And so that could be a big driver as well when you're able to, like the individual such as that, where they're having this very high output with very low energy consumption. If you're able to put those carbohydrates in and allow for them to rest, oftentimes regaining the cycle at that is not necessarily going to need the blood panels. More so, we just need to correct the overall activity levels and the energy intake to allow for them to see their cycle transpire. Because oftentimes I think that this is another aspect that I was speaking to within the marketing aspect within hormonal function, regaining cycles and those things, is that the big pitch is that it's supplement related. It's just focus on supplements. You'll once you get these supplements in place, you're going to regain your cycle. Whereas I mean, truthfully, like 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, that individual needs to change their training, change the way that they're eating, change the way that they're taking care of themselves before any supplements are introduced. It's going to be a change of lifestyle first, and then once we've had time within that, and we've maybe missed another cycle, and then we've maybe missed two. It depends on how long it's been gone within those practices that we're trying to implement from a lifestyle perspective. That's where I think the true benefit comes from, because now the athlete as well or client has the ability to understand, okay, this is more lifestyle dependent rather than I'm depending on this $300, $400 allotment of supplements that I'm taking that I got my cycle back. But I was able to like keep all these stressors going on in my life and not addressing anything in my personal life or what have you. And then they're finding that they feel dependent on this laundry list of supplements that they've got to take, throughout the day or what have you.
Yeah, for sure. No, that makes complete sense. And I guess so a lot of the clients that I work with and a lot of the listeners of this podcast are coming more so from like the not all of them, but a good amount are coming from like the low carb space, because that's where I kind of was in for a while
Right.
as I got out of grad school. I kind of just ended up there, and then I made a lot of mistakes myself, and I talk about that a lot, and that's kind of how this
Always
podcast
happens.
evolved,
Yeah.
was just so just kind of talking about carbs themselves and how they can be beneficial, especially for females and hormonal health. Is there any specifics there where you could kind of back up why carbs are important for
Yeah.
hormonal health for females?
This is good. I think that from a energy standpoint of just utilizing and having that overall activity, the carbs are going to fuel that. Now, can there be a component within fats and within the absence of carbohydrates? Can there still be energy production transpire? Yes, of course. But the greater ability or the greater likelihood of better utilization of energy, more endurance based work, you're going to benefit greater from having that carbohydrate consumption in place. And so what I find within the athletes who come from a low carb or ketogenic approach as a whole, if we're able to incorporate those carbohydrates at least on their training days, because some individuals just on days that they're not having high activity, that they're sitting at an office desk all day, their food choices may lend to just a greater proponent of proteins and fats and just like vegetables throughout the day. It may just be smaller meals as a whole, and that's okay. And that's still, I think that people can be in that position and have those a lack thereof of carbohydrates or lower carb intake on those non-training days, but specifically on their training days, making sure that you're at least getting a good bit around your training session to make sure that you're fueling that session properly, as well as having adequate recovery. Because I don't know for you specifically, did you experience a scenario where you were pushing so hard through your training and just finding that you were just not recovering as well as what you're now finding within your training now, where it is going to be more carb based around the training session and in general?
Mhm. Yeah, for me personally, that was definitely one of the biggest pieces for my transition away from like the lower carb keto. And not that, and I think like what you said about training days, like off days versus training days, is an important piece of the puzzle, but also realizing that like even on your off days, you're still recovering from your days
Of
prior and all of
course.
that. So it's a little bit different depending on the person, right? But yeah, I would definitely say that incorporating carbs has helped for sure
Yeah,
from a
exactly.
recovery aspect, where I used to just think like, oh, carbs to fuel my training, or like that's what I thought was most important. And now I've kind of shifted like, oh, carbs are probably going to be a little bit more beneficial when I think about them for post workout, right? And kind of bringing that cortisol down after that workout session
Hmm.
and all of that, which I think people just tend to not think about as well. So
Yeah, I agree.
yeah. Cool. Okay, so my last question here with hormonal health as the kind of main subject. So this is something that I've seen. I don't know if it's just me, but I've seen this circulating a lot over the past few months in terms of kind of, I follow a lot of other coaches and people on Instagram. And I think social media was one of the things that is on the list that we can talk about in part two. But I've
Yeah.
seen a lot of people kind of talking about like training during your cycle and how the
Mm.
different stages of your cycle that you're in, that you should be kind of changing the different stimuli or changing up the training. For me personally, I've played around with that a little bit with some clients in the past. And I've always found that like some people, like they can fall into like what the research says, right? But
Yes.
then other people, it's like complete opposite because they have so many other stressors and other things going on in their life that like it's so intertwined that it just doesn't make sense to like change up their training just based off of the stage that they're in their cycle. What have you found with that in terms of the clients that you've worked with, or kind of your opinion on that?
Such a good question. So I think that this became a little bit more mainstream when Lyle McDonald's book came out, and there was research already being done on it, but I think he brought it to the forefront of everyone's attention of like, okay, and he speaks about it in the book where you're kind of undulating things to fit alongside your cycle because you're going to be potentially weaker or poorer recovery in this portion of your cycle. And after having read that, which I think the book may have came out like 4 years ago, maybe something along. It's been a little
Yeah,
bit.
the woman's
Okay.
book, right?
The women's book. Yeah,
That,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I
and it
want to
has like
say,
different, yeah.
um, and it's a good book for any like, even with it being a little dated in terms of how data comes out within the fitness
Mm-hmm.
and health space in general. It is a little dated on that front, but it's still very good. But I think that that's where it kind of originated from. And right after reading it, I tried to do it with everybody because I thought it was going to be like, oh, this is going to catapult me. So then I was like right away implementing it, thinking that it was going to be this big change. And what I found is that one, the same thing you spoke to is that not every client is that way. Like some individuals are actually stronger in that portion of their phase or of their cycle. And so it's interesting because I was finding in that initial kind of trial of utilizing it that if I took that week as kind of a deload, then they'd have something else come up. And now I'm having, of the 4 weeks in a month, I'm utilizing 2 of those as a deload. One of them is not even really needed, but I feel as though because of the research that it is needed. And so then they're getting kind of like just a half month of this lackluster effort to their training that isn't overly necessary potentially because of circumstances within their life, within their cycle, and those things. So I think that it overcomplicated things, especially for the athlete, because they're like, I don't really feel like I need this right now. And I'm like, no, no, no. Because of your cycle. This is the research. This is why you need to pay attention. And it just wasn't true. And so I think that it overcomplicates things. Now, if you find that truthfully on a rhythmic clock that you are just not having good recovery or good strength at this point in your cycle every single month, then at that point, I would bring that up to your coach. There are some clients who we have had to coordinate in that fashion to where they have a little bit of a lighter load within portions of their cycle. But I would say for the greater majority of individuals, it's not something to focus on, and potentially something to be mindful of where you're auto-regulating your own training sessions going in and just being vocal with your coach when you check in of like, hey, my cycle was really bothering me throughout this week. I didn't feel that my strength was adequate. I ended up backing off in terms of the RPE allotments that we had set into place. And I think that just being vocal within that is going to be helpful. And it's a learning experience for you as the client to be able to, because the whole goal is that you're working with the coach for however long that you have the opportunity to do so. But when you leave, you want to leave with more knowledge, more confidence, more understanding of how things are going to transpire. And that's a big piece of that, is that the coach can give you as much content as they possibly can. They can give you as many PDF documents as possible, but you putting things into practice, you putting things into trialing different things, potentially having success, potentially having failure, is the only way that you're really going to learn to be able to walk away from that and say, that money was very well invested and I feel better, moving forward within my own fitness journey. Because I know that there are clients that I get on the call with, or potential clients now, where they've worked with many coaches, but they walked away with basically nothing because they were just following the plan time and time again and not really asking questions or digging deeper into different things, and finding themselves in this position where it's like, I paid all this money and I still know just as much as I did when I got started. And I'm just following these plans that were given to me. So that's a piece of the puzzle kind of coming off the coattails of that to talk about.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I think some of the main points you made there were super beneficial. And I think one of the biggest things too is just having that data to look back on, like having those, months of data to actually see like, okay, what is happening within my cycle, and then what's also happening within my training performance and how I'm sleeping and all of that. Because if you don't have like a log to look back on, you're just kind of guessing. And I think that is one of the biggest things is like people, they're like, oh, I don't want to like take the time to log these things or have like an Excel sheet or whatever it is. But that in itself is what's like, because you're not going to remember what happened a month ago. Like that's just not realistic, right? Like I don't remember how long I slept 2 days ago. So, all
true.
these things, right? It's just all these things. I know there's a question that I fill into my check-in every form. Is like, what's the day that felt best to you last week? And I'm always like,
I have no idea.
I need to like look back and like take note of this because I don't remember. Like you have so many other things going on. So I think the biggest thing to that is just having data to look back on so that you can actually see like what's going on and not trying to rely on memory is a huge piece of it with biofeedback, all of that. And then also what you said about like asking questions if you're working with a coach, like I always preface like when I'm first starting with someone, like you need to ask, like I want to teach you as much as I can, but I don't know, like I can't read your mind. So ask me questions so that I can help you, in that regard. And I know you're the same way there too. So yeah, I think those are all really great points. And I think when it comes to trying to structure your training around your cycle specifically, I think that is probably more of the advanced side of things. And a lot of people will start to like what we call like major in the minor when it comes to that stuff. And that's really like, you're kind of just wasting your time there. Like, let's get the big rocks in place first. And then, if you are someone, like you said, who notices like it's, every single month it's on repeat where something, you just feel low energy at this specific time, like obviously pay attention to that. So I love how you put that. Awesome. Okay. So we're going to do part 2 because there's a bunch of other ones that we want to get to.
We have a lot of other stuff to touch on.
Yeah. I think we got through 3.
Yeah. Of the 8.
Oh boy.
So we did pretty decent in an hour-ish.
Yeah. I might have to hound you down for a few other parts, but we'll at least get part 2 and then I'll just shut up for most of the time and let you go. Cool. Okay. So before, I definitely I want you to tell everybody where they can find you, all that stuff. But before we do, I'm going to ask you a final question. And I can ask you this again next time too. So feel free to just, whatever comes to mind, right? Okay. So the question is, has there been anything at all? It can be anything. It doesn't have to be nutrition, fitness, anything at all that you've changed your mind about in the past year, and why?
So I've got 2 things. One is how late individuals can consume caffeine and it doesn't affect their sleep. So I originally was of the train of thought, I mean, from personal experience more so than anything, that I could really consume caffeine up until about 5 o'clock in the evening and feel like I'm okay to go to bed. Like it wasn't a huge deal for me. And of this last year, for whatever reason, it's turned to a place where I can't consume caffeine really past 2 o'clock and still have adequate sleep. Like it kind of keeps me awake, where that's one thing that has changed drastically for me over this past year, of just duration of how long caffeine is going to stay in my system, plus the effects that it's going to have just more from a brain activity perspective. Because I know that the listeners, everyone's been in a situation where your body is very exhausted, but your mind is going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And I was having that transpire when I was consuming caffeine later, as I had always done, into that 4 or 5 o'clock window. And so that's one thing. And 2 is that I don't know if it's changed my mind, but became very aware of, is that we are putting mirrors into our gym at the new house, and I had no idea how much mirrors cost. So if you're ever wanting to open a gym or put mirrors into place, understand that it's probably going to be more expensive than what you're thinking. That was an eye-opening experience for me. And I want whoever's listening and you're wanting to do that to be more prepared than I was, because I'm sure that the person who quoted me, my facial expression when he said the price was probably pretty funny. He kept a straight face, but I'm sure I felt it. I was like, oh my gosh, wow.
Oh man, that is, I will definitely keep that in mind. I want to have a home gym eventually. I live in an apartment right now.
Yes.
So yeah, I will definitely take note of that. But the caffeine thing, that is something. So do you feel like because obviously, the research shows that caffeine has a half-life of about like 6 hours. So
Right.
like when the time that you consume it, 6 hours later, there's going to be about half that amount still circulating in your system, which, right, half-life.
Right.
That's what the research says, right? So
Right.
do you feel like for you that it's changed over time, or like as you maybe gotten older, or is it just like maybe you're just more aware of it?
I would say it's probably a combination of all the things you said. I think that
Okay.
the time that I've been exposed to caffeine, the amount of time that I've just consistently consumed caffeine for duration of time. Obviously, there's been breaks here and there, but for the greater majority of the past, decade, I would say I've
Mhm.
consistently had caffeine on a very regular basis, in part to enjoyment, in part to the necessity of the caffeine itself. Whether that just be, I mean, I've always drank black coffee. It was something that I did. Like my dad was a huge black coffee drinker as a kid, and so he would always make me a separate pot of decaf when I was young. And so just because I wanted to be exactly like him, I'd sit there with the sports paper, he'd be reading another paper, and like that was just what I did because he was like my idol at the time, and definitely fostered an obsession with just black coffee. And so in that, I think that the exposure to caffeine for me, and then potentially I think that stress in general plays a role in it as well, depending on where your overall stress levels play. If you're a very relaxed individual on a regular basis, I would imagine that half-life is not going to affect you
Mhm.
in the same way that someone who's going to be a little bit more high strung or having a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
So many different factors. I think that obviously hydration levels are going to play a large role into that as well. And just the metabolism of the caffeine itself. I think that this is total hypothesis, but I think that my body just metabolized it so well for a really great duration of time. I had a great stint of time where I could just consume caffeine, and then if I wanted to go to sleep, I could go to sleep. But then
Yeah.
now it's like no, you drink caffeine, you're staying up with me. Like I'm not just my brain is like no, we are
Yeah.
together in this.
Yeah, for sure. I've never understood how like my dad would have a latte if we went out to dinner at like 9 o'clock at
Yeah,
night or something. I'm like, how are you doing that? Like, I just don't get it. It's like a shot of espresso, right? Like at nine
right.
o'clock at night. And I personally, like, I don't know if it's like a, I've just done this for a long time, is like, if I have caffeine after noon, like
Hmm.
even if it doesn't physically affect me, like mentally, I'm like, shoot, I just drank coffee at 12:30. Like I'm not sleeping tonight. And it's like,
Yeah,
the placebo effect where I just like think about it. But yeah, for me, I have to like cut caffeine off at 12, or I just like, whether it's
keeps you
physiological
up.
or
Yeah,
or mental, I just can't fall asleep. So yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so let's wrap this one up, and then we'll figure out when part two will be. Do you want to just tell our viewers or listeners where they can find you, your website, social media? You post a ton of great content. You guys
Thank you.
have an amazing YouTube channel. So just tell us where we can find you and soak up all that great stuff.
Thank you. The Instagram is going to be Alex Bush __. Bush is BUSH, which you're going to see on the title of this podcast. Doesn't matter. And then the website and YouTube is going to be Physique Development, PHYSIQUE development .com would be the website. And then you can search that on YouTube. You're going to find lots of good stuff from an exercise execution perspective, and just fun education things there for us. And then you will Physique Development on Instagram as well. So that's the main places to find me. There's good articles on the website as well. We're getting into the realm of written copy. And yeah.
Awesome. And you and your wife, Sue, and Austin Current have a podcast yourselves, Physique
Yes.
Development as well. Lots of great info on that. So I'll link all of that in the show notes, so people can check that out. And I look forward to part two and maybe part three.
Me too.
Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of MetFlex and Chill. I hope you enjoyed it. It would be awesome if you could give the show 5 stars and leave a review on iTunes. We're trying to get placed in the top 100 health podcasts, and the 5-star ratings and reviews are what can help make that happen. I'll add step-by-step directions for leaving a review in the show notes. I know it's a big ask, but it really helps. Thanks again. See you next time.